What's good, everybody? I'm Jędrek. He is Sodek.
Hello.
And today we are gonna present to you our very first monthly modern tier list. October 2021 edition. Let's go. Alright, so it's quite likely that probably both of you, or all of you, or some of you, I guess. It's pretty improbable that it was all of you, but some of you already seen Sodek's tier list before. Some of you seen my tier list videos before. And as you might have noticed, we've had a bit different approaches to the topic. And we've spent some good amount of time to unify it. So we both agree on a methodology and stuff like that. And luckily, we've reached a point in which we are both pleased with how it turned out, and we fully endorse this method of segregating decks. So it is, in my opinion, extremely vital to provide some context for how you categorize every tier, because saying stuff like this is tier 1, this is tier 2 without providing a necessary context means absolutely nothing. Because what does tier 2 means? What does tier 1 means? It means nothing by itself. You have to give it the meaning. So we decided to group our decks in I guess technically 5, but really 4 categories. There is a Z tier that we will never probably use, which is reserved for stuff like Hogak and Eldrazi. And
At least we hope that
we
will
never have to use it again. It's like Hogak, Eldrazi, Valky with Cascade under old rules, stuff like that, like the absolute utter brokenness in the format. Then we have S, A, B, C. And how does those work? We'll get to that in a moment, but before the hand, we have to familiarize you with some pretty important terms that we will use, most notably bad decks and good decks, in quotation marks both, because this is like, obviously good and bad are words that are very filled with certain, like, not emotion, but certain quality, obviously, because bad is bad, well, and good is good. But it's it's fundamental for you to understand that we don't mean that bad decks are all bad. It's just a way to reflect on the power level of the deck, like raw power of the deck. So we've prepared this this graph, this plane. I guess it's not graph; it's a Cartesian plane technically, to help you. So imagine that we have two axes, I guess, that are right now on the screen. One of them is raw power, and the second one is positioning. So on both raw power and positioning axis, we can name or try to give a quality to a deck that are high and low on that axis. And for raw power, those names are bad decks and good decks. What do we mean by raw power? Basically, there's no such thing as abstract power, because you are never in the abstract in Magic. But for example, a deck with little raw power is a deck like, I don't know. In my opinion, Yawgmoth is kind of low on raw power, so that doesn't really agree. But to give you some other example,
maybe we should try to find like the
Red Green Ponza.
best...
Red Green Ponza is a perfect deck in my opinion. You're playing shitty cards in your deck, and what you hope for is that your block pieces are good. So your deck is, well, I guess technically you are not playing Ragavan in the deck, but deck like I don't know, red.
Okay, I have an idea. Maybe slivers.
Slivers. I don't know what kind of metagame slivers really exploit, but slivers are obviously like bad. But for example, in my opinion, mill is also like a low raw power. You are playing mill cards, so you are playing stuff like Hedron Crab, and you are playing stuff like just mill cards, which are not very good by themselves. So if the metagame doesn't line up well for you, you are just getting paired against Burn, and Burn doesn't care if you mill them because Burn will win beforehand.
Yeah, and what's more important, mill cards does technically nothing and can quite often help the opponent as long as they are not milled entirely. So, for example, you can play like 3 or 4 mill spells, and the opponent game plan will not be disrupted by enemy. And because of that, because of mills, Goldfish Time, it's not the fastest deck ever. Sometimes it has like 10-4 kills with archive traps, but opponent needs to cooperate with that. Your Goldfish Time is quite slow. Your cards are quite high on average converted mana cost, etc., etc. And by that mean that we can say that mill can be a bad deck. But there are times when these bad decks can win tournaments because like of the second scale.
Yes. Also, with bad decks, I want to touch on that a bit more. We don't only mean like decks with bad cards, but also strategies that didn't age that well, I think. So, for example, I don't think that Mono Green Tron is a 2021 power level deck. It can be good if you are playing into a right metagame, because Tron's matchups always were like this. And basically, good decks, in quotation marks, once again, are 2021 power decks with Incarnations, with Ragavans, with Expressive Iteration, Murktide, all those broken cards, with Urza's Saga. And bad decks... excuse me, once again?
Cascade. As good
yes, Shardless Agent, stuff like this. So it's basically a raw power level scale once again. And then we have the positioning axis on which we have decks that are poorly positioned and well positioned. You can technically add like extremely well positioned to it. We will talk about that a bit later. So as you can see, you have two axes on which a deck can gain value when it comes to selecting your deck for a tournament. And roughly both of those axes, obviously both of those axes influence the overall tier of the deck. And roughly this is what we came to. So if a deck is high up on one of those axes, it's in a B tier. It still lacks something. For example, if we have a deck like Murktide, which is, I guess it's a spoiler alert, but yeah, a deck like Murktide, which is an extremely strong deck when it comes to raw power. You're playing all the best cards, and all your spells are cheap. You are very good at playing on low land counts or high land counts. It's just a great deck, but it is not very well positioned right now because there are so many incarnations, so many decks with just a pile of removal spells that are good against Murktide, and this means that Murktide is poorly positioned right now. This is in my opinion. Sodek is sharing my opinion, by the way, and that's why we have it in. This is a good deck, but it's poorly positioned, so it is a B tier deck for us. Or by contrast, we have a deck like Tron, which is a bad deck in quotation marks, but it's pretty well positioned right now because it's really good against 4-color Yorion decks. It's really good against those people who are just trying to out mid-range one another. So it's a well-positioned bad deck. Therefore, it's also in a B tier, but for different reasons. Then we have A tier decks, which are just when the stars align and everything. So good decks that are well positioned, or bad decks that are extremely well positioned. So, for example, if you are playing a deck like Dredge, if you are playing a deck like Mill, a deck like Tron, but it's about the best weekend to play this deck, it will be in A tier. So, for example, there is, I don't know, 1 or 2 weekends per year that we will put Tron in A tier. But on those weekends, it's one of the best choices you can make.
I remember the Modern Showcase finals weekend when there was Uro all around and so on and so on. And the metagame was so strange that Boggles were the best choice for the tournament. It was in 2020. There was one moment for that. And I think this is
I
the
think
the
it
best
was
example.
when companions were still unnerved,
Yes.
because it was very good against Red Black Lurrus. So just
Yes.
played a Boggle and attached auras to it. Yeah, and then we have C tier, which are like both of those axes on their low end. So those are decks that we wouldn't recommend touching at a certain point, which are bad decks that are also poorly positioned. So to sum this all up, we have this handy dandy tiers explanation that you can now pause and read for yourselves. I will read it to you as well. So S tier, we haven't put it on the graph because it's a pretty easy explanation. S tier is just best deck or best decks. If we think that a modern at any given point has a best deck or best decks, we'll put them in S tier.
For instance, remember times before Modern Horizons 2 when there was an endless battle between Blue Red Prowess and Green White Heliod? These two decks would be in S tier,
Yes,
in my opinion.
exactly. Or for example, I don't know, man and a half ago when Murktide was winning everything. Then Murktide was an S tier deck, in my opinion. Or Hammer was an S tier deck for like 2 weeks before people found out that they can play elementals. Those are some examples of best decks. Then we have A, well-positioned good decks, and very well-positioned bad decks, with the importance on very well-positioned. It won't happen, as I said, very often, but from time to time it will. And then it's your moment to strike Dredge players or Mill players or whatever else you are playing. B is poorly positioned good decks and well-positioned bad decks, and C is poorly positioned bad decks. So, with that out of the way, we can go to the decks themselves. First of all, how it will look. We will have our tier lists in those empty spaces above me and at my left.
Yes.
Right? This is my left. This is my right, but your left of me, so it's kind of weird for me because this is my right hand. So to make it even easier and more transparent, Sodex's tier list will be here with the red arrow above him, and my tier list will be right here.
Nice.
So we have Sodex's tiers, my tiers, everything is Gucci.
And we'll talk about each archetype separatively, and we'll quickly talk why we think that this deck belongs to this tier.
Okay, so before we go into it and you spend your days and nights restlessly trying to figure out why we decided to show them in this certain order, we chose an alphabetical order to make it easier for us, basically. So it's purely like the tiers obviously are the the illustration of power levels of those decks, but the order in which we will discuss them is purely alphabetical. So don't pay any attention to that whatsoever. It's also easier that way because later on, when this is on YouTube, we can timestamp every deck and it's alphabetical. So you will just find the deck that you want to listen about, like for the second time, for example, because you are playing this deck much more easily. So without further ado, the first deck, Sodek, let's go.
Okay, the first deck we want to talk about is 4-color Blink. This is a kinda new deck, because it's an evolution of the old Elemental Shell, when control players decided to switch from Risen Reef to Eternal Witness. And right now we see a lot of different stuff. Some decks are playing 60 cards, some decks are playing 80 cards with Yorion. And the goal of this deck is to outrank the opponent and make so much value that the opponent can come back. The deck is really good at playing a fair game of Magic, but it also struggles a bit against unfair wars. For example, big mana like Tron, or combo like Belcher or Storm, or anything like that should deal with that deck pretty easily. Okay, Andrek, what's your opinion about this tier of the?
Okay, so in my opinion, Blink sits favorably in an A-tier situation. It is a fundamentally great deck with a ton of great cards and very up-to-date coherent strategy. You are using pitch spells that we've talked about last week. You're using pitch spells to make up the tempo for your relative lack of 1-mana spells. You are playing some 1-mana spells, of course, but you are not playing 20 of them. You are playing like, I don't know, 10 or something like this. You're playing a bunch of 2-drops, you're playing some 3-drops, you're playing 4-drops. Some of them are Omnaths, which pay for themselves. So you have very good mechanisms to recoup any lost tempo. You are playing for colors, so you have access to basically best cards that you can have access to. I don't believe there are like black cards you want to play. And if you want to play black cards, honestly, you can splash for them. Like, if you want to play a certain black card, you can just play one corresponding shockland that suits your mana base best, or a Triumph even, and you can play like. I know that at some point, Alberto62, who's known for playing a lot of 4-color control, wanted to splash for Chaos Guile, so they just had one Watery Grave and played Chaos Guiles. So it's perfectly fine to splash in this deck, and you can do that with ease. And then finally you have Yorion, you have Companion. Companions are broken, as we all know. So you are insulated in the longer game against anything, basically. Any mid-range deck that doesn't have counterspells. I think counterspells are the weakness of Yorion in fair matchups. If Yorion even has, or Blink, if Blink has a weakness in fair matchups, because your spells are expensive to some degree, and you need them to resolve to pay for themselves. For example, Omnath, and you are trading 1-for-1 on the stack. So if you are playing against a deck that has a bunch of counter spells, a bunch of maybe discard, then this is less likely to be a very favored matchup, or even a favored one, than, for example, a deck like Giant Saga. Sodek, what's your ranking for?
I also have it in A. In my opinion, playing like, I'm not known for playing really good cards. I'm more like a critical mass player or a combo player. But playing a deck that has good cards makes variance as a threat. So if you can, and if you feel right about playing good cards, just do it, because you will like, your good cards will win more random situations than bad cards. So that's actually good. And I think you told why this deck is good, so I won't repeat the same.
Okay.
Okay, another deck we want to talk about is Affinity. Affinity is a old school archetype that got a new life after Modern Horizons 2. And in the first weeks, I was trying to test it, and it was quite fine. But I struggled to beat hate, especially when the hate was quite high because of the hammer, and the Affinity got a collateral damage. For example, Force of Vigor was one of the cards that was really hard to beat. But the deck somehow can show the power level and can win from time to time. So, Jędrek, what do you think about Affinity?
Okay. So we've started with the highs, basically, with A tier. And now we are going straight to the lows. I think Affinity is a C tier deck. I don't think that Affinity is a strong deck in abstract, or like it doesn't have a raw power. Like you're basically playing a bunch of draft stuff in like Memnites and Ornithopters to make your divinations cheaper, and it kind of makes it sounds good to have a 1-mana creature, 1-mana 2/2 flyer that draws 2 cards. Sounds amazing, unless all the cards you're drawing are bad, and your cards are bad because they are those 0 and 1-mana artifacts that enables your good artifacts. One saving grace of Affinity is Saga, because Saga is a very strong card and your constructs will be really big in this deck. But I still don't think that Saga alone can elevate the power of the deck for me to being a good deck.
Okay.
But there is also positioning. And I think the positioning also sucks for Affinity right now. Because, for example, if you want to play a bunch of creatures against Fury and Solitude out of Yorion, not a very good idea. They also have Omnath to pad their life total. If they need to, they can trade with your Mirror Enforcer. After they drew a card, gain 4 life and gain mana. Usually, sometimes even gain like 8 life. So I don't think that. And also, Teferi Time Raveler can bounce every land you have, literally. So that's also not very nice when you are trying to set up Saga and your opponent plays turn 3 Teferi to Stone Rain you with a cantrip, obviously. So I don't think that it's a good time to play Affinity right now.
Okay.
How about you,
I was much closer to B, but I ended on C too. And it's mostly because of the positioning. I don't feel this deck is very bad. I have a feeling when there are meta games when Affinity can be good, because after all you're drawing extra cards, and after you trade with your opponent with resources, sometimes your Signal Person Frogmites can deal enough damage to take care. And Cranial Plating means that your Ornithopter or Mermaid can eventually be a real threat that heavy control decks will need to spare a card for mana to kill it. So there are moments when this deck is good, but right now I think that Affinity struggles against current top 3, maybe even top 4. Affinity has problems with this 4-color Yorion piles because of Fury, Solitude, plus Ephemerate. It's not where you want to be. Affinity also has problems against Rhinos, because when you're on a play, they can just fire ice your 1 or 2 creature, or even tap your Saga to not create a top tier, then just spam Rhinos and you are in a bad situation all of a sudden. As well as Hammer. Hammer looks like a better Affinity. It can present more often early kills. You need both clock and interaction, which is hard to achieve when you're drawing 1 card per turn, maybe a few divinations.
And you have a bunch of
So,
tap lands also.
Yeah, that's also problematic. So overall, I would love to see Affinity being higher, and I will play this deck from time to time because I really like it, and I feel it can present really powerful draws. But it's not the best time to try, in my opinion.
I think it would be a solid B tier deck. Like it might, maybe obviously it's tiers change from time to time, but it could be potentially a solid good deck with Mirrodin Artifact Lance and Band. I think it would
Oh
be
yeah, of
a.
course.
I
Yeah,
don't think it will
absolutely.
be broken by any means. I think it would.
Yeah, it
I
will be
think
too
it would
easy
be
to
good.
stop.
Because the one of the big problems of Affinity is also that you have Saga, but how often you play Saga on 2 and then you draw your next land and it's a tap land and you can't even make a construct. That sucks so much. Okay, next up, what do we have, Sadek?
And the next deck we have is Amulet.
Okay, so with Amulet, we kind of met in the middle with Sadek because we both have Amulet in tier B.
B.
Uh,
And like the Amulet was quite interesting because right after Modern Horizons 2 became legal, everyone were like Amulet is broken, it will be banned soon because Urza's Saga can find Amulet and you turn free opponents all the time. Suddenly the meta found a way in form of Unholy Hit and with Ragavan and Murktide and other red decks being everywhere and Primeval Titan was just killed because they were able to kill the Titan for 1 mana and still pressure them to not let them do the stuff. But because of how the meta game was shaping in the last couple of weeks, we saw more decks with Solitude. We saw more decks with Fury. That means that these tempo decks with Unholy Hit were not as much played. We also did this, like, we don't see as many Unholy Hits. Solitude can be problematic, but this means that Primeval Titan resolves. And if Primeval Titan resolves, they can just go for 2 Roots of Sagas, and they will have enough mana to create constructs, so these constructs can take over the game, even if Primeval Titan is killed. So overall, I think that the current positioning of Amulet is really good. About being good or bad, I would still say that there are enough tools in the metagame to stop it, especially with Amulet being so weak right now to Force of Vigor. So I feel it's a kind of bad deck, which is poorly positioned, and it can do miracles if you know what you are doing. Because it's a very complicated deck, and you need to know it inside out in these attrition fights what to do exactly. I also want to point out one weakness of the deck. It's Blood Moon. And in my opinion, Blood Moon is in a great spot right now, and many decks are playing Blood Moon. Like this is one of the biggest reasons why, for example, Belcher was played and had any real results. And there are other decks that are looking very shitty, but they have Blood Moon, so they can just win tournaments. You saw this Jeskai Stoneblade deck with Blood Moon. It's looking awful, really awful, but Blood Moon was a real deal.
okay, so you kind of touched on that already, but if you have Amulet in the B tier, is it a well-positioned bad deck or poorly positioned good deck?
OMG.
Because it kind of have to be one of those. You said that that Amulet is a bad deck, so I would kind of lean towards saying that it's kind of well-positioned bad deck because it looks okay versus Yorion. And I think if people are trying to play Tron and decks like Burn to beat up on Yorion piles, Amulet is really good against Burn and good against Tron. So it looks like a pretty good position. Also, Murktide is in decline right now, and Murktide is a terrible matchup for Amulet. They've got Clock, they've got they've got Unholy Heat, they've got Blood Moons post board. They basically have everything that made Amulet disappear for months. So I do think that I do agree with basically everything that Sodek said, and I do think that Amulet very solidly lies in this bad deck, good position category right now. Okay, next up we have Belcher. So,
Okay.
Sodek,
This
tell
is
us everything you
OMG.
can tell about Belcher in a minute.
I don't want to spend the next 2 hours about talking Belcher, so I just say only a few words. I really like the fact that pure combo deck is back in Modern, and I think Belcher is clearly the best pure combo deck in the format. If you had an opportunity to read my sideboard guide or deck guide about it, you will know why. For those who are not that familiar, it's because it's a combo deck that's not affected by the most commonly played cards to stop it. For example, Force of Vigor is kinda okay versus Belcher, but if you have Ironcrag Feet plus Belcher, Force of Vigor will do nothing. If you have Reckless the Pups into the combo pile, it will do nothing. The deck can play well versus the Fairy Time Reveler. The deck can play well versus other stuff that should stop other combo decks. It's not affected by Grave Hate and so on. And this is one of the best decks to play both Blood Moons and Peach spells because your lands are not colorless, they are colored. That's why you can play post sideboard Fury and not care about losing your card because you don't need many cards to win. You can easily win from multi 4 on 10 free order 4. So you like when you are keeping 7 with Fury, it's like you don't lose actually a card because you don't need it anyway. Overall, I think Belcher is still a bad deck. Like it's hard to say for me. Like you are playing a bunch of, for example, Strike It Reach. You are playing a bunch of rituals that aren't doing that much, and you need to draw your combo pieces. So obviously you mill a lot to achieve that, and that's kind of balancing itself. But it's like you need to sometimes accept that you'll lose to variants, which is kind of hard. And Belcher is the type of deck when you should grab it in certain metagames. For example, when Blood Moon is really good, you should play Belcher. When metagame is slowing down, you should play Belcher. But if you expect, for example, a lot of Murktide, a lot of decks that can somehow clock you and slow you down, for example, with this card, or any tutorable hate, I would avoid it. Even though I really love it and I will probably keep playing it in all tournaments I can.
Okay, so also Belcher is by far, it's gotta be by far the worst 2-color mana base you can have because it's all tap lands.
Yes.
It's all tap lands
base...
or turbo shock lands or bolt lands, I guess, even.
Yeah.
So for a 2-color deck, it has surprisingly shitty mana base, but also its color requirements are not that strict. So that's okay. I think the most painful thing is the tap lands because it just slow you
that's
down.
true. Like sometimes you have really good hand, but with all tap lands, and you have to mulligan because it's too slow.
So solidly, once again, Sodek is the Belcher master. I agree with everything he said. So I think it's for both of us. It's an easy B tier.
Yeah,
it's just so good. Like I can't fathom Yorion winning against Belcher regularly with the current builds of Yorion. It's just
personally, I would say that there are moments when I would, for example, when I won Sunday Modern Challenge, I would easily place Belcher in A tier because no one was prepared. Right now, people have Pitting Needles main deck. They have more, for example, 1 or 2 dedicated cards for the matchup. So this obviously affects how the deck is played out, but I think it's still perfectly capable of winning the tournament.
Yeah.
And spoiler alert, I will play Belcher in the next tournaments I play.
Okay, so also I think that it's a good moment to touch upon something we already mentioned, that there are like Belcher is a very potent bad deck because when we talked about this unlikely scenario that a bad deck is very well positioned and it happens like once or twice a year, I think it can easily happen like on like 10 weekends during the year instead of 2 weekends for Belcher, because it doesn't take as much for Belcher to be really good, well positioned. It doesn't take as much as for, like, example, for Mill or for Tron. Like, if people are just trying, like Belcher, when it's well positioned, it's very often very well positioned. And
Yes.
for Mill and Tron, they are mostly in this well positioned category, and rarely they will be extremely well positioned.
Yeah, like for instance, when you are thinking about the good position of Belcher, is people are playing bad decks, slow decks that are weak to Blood Moon, plus people don't have dedicated hate. When you are playing, for example, Mill, like people will still have endurances because it's a really good card. So your good position for Mill will be opponent won't have 4 endurances but only 3. Something like this. So the hate will still happen, and it's much easier to assemble a situation when people just won't have pity needles because they will not feel that it's needed.
Yeah, I do think that the worst thing that can happen for Belcher is a big metagame shift when people are straying away from creatures and are back to playing main deck forces in a lot of decks. Main deck Force of
Yeah.
Negation is probably the best main deck card you can play aside from like dedicated cards like Needle. Okay, moving on. We have Bring to Light. It's a deck that is largely gone, but it made some waves recently in some challenges. So that give me your two sentence pitch for BTL. No more than that. We don't have to go in depth on every single deck.
I still don't understand why the deck is having results. Maybe it's because it's really good against your piles, but overall, I'm not the biggest fan of the deck. And I feel that if you want to play a multicolor Omnat deck, you should play Yorion Pirates instead of Bring to Light.
Yeah, easy C for me as well. The one saving grace that might push it to towards the B tier is, as Sodek mentioned, a probably good matchup against Yorion, because Yorion or the Yorion Blink decks are very vulnerable to a card Scapeshift. Like, Scapeshift is a very, very good tool to have against Yorion. So that's one saving grace of BTL for me. But overall, I think this deck is a bit too inconsistent. It relies too much on hitting every single one drop or land drop. You have to play like 28 lands, so you don't have that many. You don't have that many ways to interact early on, and you can get run out by stuff like Crashcade. Oh, sorry, Footfalls, because this name is the Crashcade name is terrible. Sorry, hate it so much. But yeah. I've been consuming too much content from people who actually like this blasphemous name.
Okay, moving on.
But yeah, moving on to another deck. We are getting...
Okay, and another one is Burn. Burn is a deck that was kind of around from the beginning of Modern Existence. And the deck hasn't changed much.
Was it really? Like, I guess people were playing it in FNMs, but I think Burn started happening for real when Cons of Tarkir released and Monastery Swift Spear got added to the format. I think beforehand people were playing...
It was Eidolon.
Eidolon came in Journey into Nyx, which is one set before Cons. I guess there's a core set as well between them, but it's the same. Like, Journey into Nyx is spring of 2014, and Cons of Tarkir is fall of 2014. So it's basically...
Okay, I have to say that Burn with Deathrite Shaman was also cool.
Yes.
I think it was
yes, I guess that was a moment when Burn was better because it has Deathrite, and you could splash for... You wanted to play black anyways, you had Deathrite, so you were playing Bumped in the Night, so you didn't have to play all those stinky cards like I don't know, Spark,
Spark
Elemental or
Elemental.
Hell Spark Elemental or something like of Keldon Marauders, all that shit. Like
That was something. So.
yeah.
Okay,
So
about the burn in 2021. What has changed that lead to this moment when burn is really in a really good position? I feel it's because how the metagame shifted. The metagame is much slower compared to, for example, what was happening during Hogak Summer or later after when Oko and Uro was released. So the metagame is slower and we don't have that many live gun effects around. The only one big is Omnat, but Omnat costs 4 mana, so costing 4 to compared to 3 with Oko and Uro is a huge difference. And Bear is doing one thing and it's doing it really well. So, so if your opponents aren't fast enough, you will most likely do their job. And what's really important for me, for a very long time, people were not maybe believing that Burn is a really well positioned deck, and no one had real hate cards. Right now, it's changing. For example, you can see Sunset Reverie in blue white, or you can see Lightning Helixes in Yorion piles, just to beat Burn. And as long as people are not very high on live gain effects, Burn is a beast. You just do one thing and kill the opponent before they can outgrind you.
okay, so as Sadek already said, Burn, Beast. So it can only be B tier for Beast, obviously. And I will add to this that indeed people were kind of spoiled by Uro and Oko, and they didn't need to have hate cards for Burn for like over a year because those decks are just insane. Like those cards were just insane against Burn. A 5-card hand with Oko was beating Burn by itself. A 5-card hand with Uro was usually, maybe not usually, but pretty often doing that as well.
Yeah, with like 3 fetch lands.
Yeah,
Just
like
to...
free fetch lands, Uro, and God forbid, like Fatal Push or Abrupt Decay or Bolt or something. Like it was just so hard for Burn to.
Okay, and about the positioning of how often Burn can be A, I think that there was a moment for Burn being A like a month ago.
Yes,
right
I
now
agree.
with hate cards, it's not that easy, but you can still easily take down.
Yeah. Also, for those of you who wonder now, but Uro got banned in February, and then Modern Horizons released in June. What happened between that time? Well, between February and June, the best or one of the best decks in the format was Heliod, with a bunch of life gain in it, and it was pretty hard for Burn to win against Heliod. Like for example, against Uro, you can a well-timed Skullcrack can win against Uro, but it can't really win against against Heliod with how many different instances of life gain they can have. Or it was similarly against Oko, because Oko could, for example, make 2 food tokens, and they could have cracked it after you EOT Boros Charm them. Uro was all sorcery speed, so it was way easier to play around Uro with Skullcrack than it is against instant speed effects.
I think Enrique also forget one thing, that there was kind of Burn around because Prowess was really like
I guess Prowess was like a red aggressive
Burn
deck.
Spirit was around, but in the form of Prowess. Right now, Prowess is pushed out of the meta because how Elementals are good against it, and you don't have any real reason to try to deal a lot of creature combat damage. It's much better to play cards that are harder to interact with.
Okay.
So that's why Burn is here and Prowess is not that high. Or is it at all?
It's not on our list at all this month. Okay. Next up, we have creativity.
Yes.
Anything you want to say about creativity, Sodek? Because
I would really love this deck to be better. Every time I'm trying it and I feel okay, I have creativity, turn for a miracle, and etc. etc. Every time I'm trying it, it's bad. The mana is bad because it's very affected to Blood Moon, a lot of pain, a lot of tap lands, problems. Second, a miracle by itself isn't really good in a world when there's solitude around. And because of that, two reasons I'm not very interested in the deck. I saw versions with Primeval Titan and Valakut, which is kinda thing that it's not, in my opinion, explored enough. And I believe if you want to play creativity, this is the way. Because you are going to, for Titan, you have this trigger that will always do something even if the opponent has Solitude. Your Valakut and Dwarven are working nicely with each other because Dwarven is a mountain, so we are not losing the mountain number to shoot in mid game. So overall, if you want to go this route, I strongly advertise Primeval Titan, and please don't touch Emrakul. It's not the best moment to play Emrakul.
Yes, I agree. It's very it's C tier for both me and Sodek. It's pretty hard to get out of the bind of Teferi plus Solitude, which most decks run like those cards side by side. Because even if you want to protect your Emrakul from Solitude with Serra Emissary, they still have Teferi to bounce Emissary. They still have Supreme Verdict if you are playing against Blue White. Like, it's just not a great moment to play creativity. Moving down, we have Sodek. Sodek's love. Sodek's one true love.
Love Dredge. And I had real problems with categorizing Dredge because Dredge was in a nice position just before Modern Horizons 2, and then after that the problems came. By the problems I mean hate cards. Endurance, maybe not the hardest hate, but it's for 0 mana and you never see it coming. For example, you can play around Tormund Script because it's on the battlefield. It's harder to play around Endurance. And there are cards that are really hard to beat. God bless that Doughty Voidwalker is not played anymore because it was such a pain to play around it. But Sanctiferan Vec is a really good sideboard card. Sometimes it is even played in the main decks. And I really wanted to beat this card. The best solution I found was discard spells. But sometimes they have 2 copies or we top deck it, and it's not a really good game experience. But in my opinion, Dredge has very polarized matchups. You have really good matchups, for example, Burn, Yorion Piles. I think Cascade decks like Rhinos or Living Cat are kinda closer to 50-50, but they are still winnable. And you have a few horrible matchups. For example, Hammer, which is really hard to win. For example, Belcher, or basically any deck that really wants to beat you. So as
Amulet,
long as
probably.
Amulet too. So as long as you want to play Dredge, just make sure that no one really tries to beat you, because if they want to beat you, they will do it. And for now, I feel that Dredge can have its moments to be a well-positioned bad deck. And from time to time, I'm trying playing it, and I have leagues like 5-0, and after that, I'm playing 0-2-0-2 leagues. So I don't know what to feel about it. What to feel about the deck right now. I made a lot of work to make it better. I changed the mana base. I added other world decays into Aetherium's shell, and I feel it's the best what you can do with Dredge. Right, I'm still not sure if I should play fast lands or fetch lands. All I know right now is rainbow lands, and they are really good, and I want to play as many of them as possible. But if I want to play fetch shock, I can't play 12 rainbow lands, or only 10 or 9. So it's kind of hard to figure it out. Overall, for me, but maybe because I'm a lover of the deck, it's a B tier. And for Jendrek?
Okay, so Sodek has Dredge in B tier for belief, of course. And I'm more of a doubter, so ideally I would have D tier for doubt, because I doubt that Dredge is not great, but we don't have B tier. And also, frankly, I think Dredge is better than basically anything we have in C tier so far, but it's still it's a C tier for me. And it's the first deck that we disagree on when it comes to our tiering, which is so far so good. We have 7 decks in the same tier, and I think this month was pretty agreed by us. Like, we basically had most decks in the same tier, but now we are coming to some biases, some pet decks, some loves. And what's better to follow up Dredge than Grixis, Lurrus? Because that's, spoiler, another deck in which case we won't agree on the tier it should belong to. But first of all, a big thing I want to touch upon when I'm talking about Grixis, Lurrus, in this context, or basically any other context, I do mean the version of the deck that I am playing. I am not talking about Death Shadow. I am not talking about a version with Dragon's Rage Channeler. I am talking about the 4 Ragavans, 4 Snapcaster Mages, no other creatures, with a bunch of counter spells in the sideboard version of the deck that I do sincerely believe that is one of, like, it's the best version of Grixis by far, in my opinion. And it pains me to hear every time people are saying otherwise. As I mentioned previously, I'm a big fan of Dominarius Judgment podcast, and it's by far my favorite piece of content, of Magic content, that I like to consume. But it's very hard for me to hear when Ari is berating Grixis and saying that it can't beat Sanctifier Anvek. Not true, by the way. And saying that Death Shadow is the best version of Grixis in his opinion. Also not true, by the way. But I want to just commendate. This is the word. I want to basically shout out both Ari and Dom. Very good podcast. I recommend all of you to listen to it. By far, in my opinion, the most competent modern podcast out there. So, of course, in my opinion, Grixis is an A-tier deck because I think it's well positioned. Basically, in my opinion, the whole function of whether Grixis is well positioned or not is how much Tron there is. And it's getting real bad real fast, I guess. So if Tron is popular, then I wouldn't advise you to play Grixis. It's not an unwinnable matchup. It's way better also if you happen to play with open deck lists, or you did your scouting before the tournament and you know that your opponent is on Tron. Because
Multi-Ragavan.
Game one against Tron is multi-Ragavan. If you know that your opponent is playing Tron, seriously, multi 3 cards to get Ragavan. I would probably even multi 2 cards to get Ragavan. With London Mulligan, you are basically playing like a Bazaar deck in Vintage. You are just mulliganing to Ragavan and Red Source. That's all you care about game one against Tron, and you hope it's okay. It's enough. Postboard, it's a bit more open with Alpine Moon and Counterspell, but still, most 7 and 6s without Ragavan is a mulligan. So even though I have like 70% win rate against Tron, which is kind of crazy, but I mulligan a lot against them, and I got lucky a lot against them. But if Tron is popular, don't play Grixis. I think it is the only like solidly bad matchup for Grixis. Like a deck I would, if somebody asks me what do you don't want to face with Grixis, it's Tron. It's always Tron. It's by far its worst matchup. So as long as Tron is not very popular, Grixis is well positioned. And when it comes to strength of Grixis, I do think that Grixis is a really good deck. I just can't stop winning with it. I think it's great. And contrary to, once again, what Ari said, Grixis has a good hammer matchup. And I don't really get why it could have a bad Hammer matchup. But yeah, that's what I want to say about Grixis. Sodek, your opinion?
Okay, I'm not a Grixis specialist, so it's really hard for me to say something better and more insightful that you already talked about. Overall, I think it's a solid B, mostly because okay, Jandrek, don't kill me for that. I don't think Grixis is near the best decks. I think it's closer to being a bad deck, mostly because it lacks any meaningful way to close out the game fast. And if you compare this to, for example, for Color Yorion, when okay, they're not the fastest deck ever, but they they have so much more card advantage, so they can just brute force through basically everything. Grixis needs a lot more of careful navigation through all of these games, and it's much harder to come back from situations when something were not working for you. For example, when you had problems with mana base, when your Ragavan got killed early and didn't have any threat, and so on. I saw the tweets of Yamakiller who said that Grixis is a really cool deck, but it's also really hard to play perfectly. And I kind of agree with that. Like, if you compare Grixis to, for example, Affinity, like you play your things and do your stuff, you compare this to Burn, which has tricks, but I think that any any player with good fundamentals would play Burn in like 70-80% accuracy. Accuracy means
Capacity, yeah.
Yeah, capacity. And so on. Grixis is much harder to navigate, and it takes a lot of time to master and to feel all the lines. If you want to spare your time playing this, sure, go for it. You can also play Belcher.
Yeah, I do think
and master it faster. But
I do think that if you are just picking up Grixis, it's solidly a B tier deck. I don't think that if you play Grixis for the first time without learning how all the matchups goes, I don't think it's that strong. But once you master it, once you played enough of it, you understand how matchups are working. It's a really rewarding deck to learn. And as Sodek mentioned, you don't really get free wins outside of Ragavan. That's why Ragavan is great and why I would really strongly advise against cutting Ragavans. I know a bunch of people were asking, oh, can you play this deck without Ragavans? Can you play it without Ragavans? And I used to say, yes, but your deck will be worse. And I'm kind of leaning towards no, you can't. And it's 8 completely different decks without it. So it's obviously a bit of my bias, but I really recommend Grixis. It's also such a joy to play. It's really, really fun
for
to
me,
play.
it's a resident sleeper. Like I'm trying to watch your streams when you're playing Grixis, and I like, okay, I can't. I give up. Like I can watch like 2 games, but after there's so much Collagas, Command, Subcaster, Mage into go for 8 turns in
And
a row.
also, I think if there is a deck in a format that can grind on par with Yorion, it's Grixis. Grixis grinds really well. And also it has counter spells to stop. I guess Jant Saga with Ren and Erza Saga also grinds pretty well, but you don't have this safety valve of counter spells that can help you beat your opponent going over the top. And I think counter spell and Drown in the Lock, but counter magic in general is what makes Grixis so much better than Jant against those bigger mid-range decks. I think it's really important to have those cards.
Plus, there's much better mana base. Have to say that.
Oh yeah. Jant Saga's mana base is terrible.
Okay, let's go next because like it's close to an hour and we are not even in a.
Yeah, but I do believe that it will proceed a bit faster from that now on. Okay.
Our pet decks are
done.
Are already done, so it should be
So now we go to what many people believe is the best deck or one of the best decks in the format for many months now. So Hammer.
Okay, Hammer. In my opinion, if you want to find the best deck or the deck with the highest raw power, it will be Hammer. It's a combination of very often presented turn free kills and by these turn free kills, that also mean that you can play around removal quite well. For example, you won't stop Hammer with your one lightning bolt. It's not like Infect or something like other fringe combo decks like Kingfiend in the past. Hammer can play against some sort of removal really well, especially damage based, because you can just stack 2 hammers and prepare a situation when you are playing 1 hammer, then opponent is trying to kill your creature. When you play the second one, you kill them. Outside that, there are a lot of ways to grind. The most important is probably Urza Saga, but there are still Beauty Paladin, Lurrus, Stoneforge Mystic, Ingenious Smith, a lot of ways to gain card advantage. And even if your cards aren't the best, for example, you are still playing Ornithopsis and Mel Knights, it's relatively easy to make them a threat, because there's like when you have Cigarra Sate around, like the opponent always needs to respect that you can just hammer them. So the deck is, in my opinion, in a bannable position, but there are still hate cards. And luckily for us, hate cards against Hammer are good enough to keep the deck in check. We have also Vigor, Fury, Solitude, so all these free spells, speech cards, like we were talking in our last video, are really good against it. And that's why I think deck is still around, because if you had to rely on cards that costs mana, I feel that you would always be behind Hammer, because how cheap their threats are. Like, you can do so much for 0 and 1 mana. And that's me is an easy A and a strong contender to be a S tier if the metagame somehow forgets that the deck exists.
Okay, so in my opinion, Hammer is also an A tier deck, and most likely candidate. I think it's pretty universally agreed upon by many people that Hammer is one of the best candidates for the best deck in the format for the throne. And I also do think that while Yorion is probably a pretty good deck against Hammer, because you have a pile of elementals that kill your opponent's creatures for 0 mana.
And Ephemerate.
And Ephemerate. Like, Hammer is so high up on the raw power level terms, like Sodok already mentioned, that I think it needs to be extremely poorly positioned to drop to B tier. It would have to be like 40% of the field playing Yorion or Elementals, or something like this. Then we can say that Hammer is a B tier deck. Because what's great about Hammer is also that most decks that are great against Yorion are horrible against Hammer. Like, super bad. Like,
Tron.
You want to play Tron? You want to play Amulet against Hammer? Good luck. Like, you won't win. Or obviously you want to win reliably against those decks.
I feel that Amulet isn't that bad against Hammer, because you still can present your turn free, but overall Hammer will get Foxes to stop you, although you also will get Force of Vigor. So I would say that Hammer has a slight advantage, but it's not that high.
How often as Amulet will you, like, you need an actual turn free kill, not a turn free Titan. Because if you want to kill them on turn 3, they will kill you on their turn 3 or 4, whichever that one is. And also, you need to deal them usually 20 damage. Like, 16 damage is not enough. Like, if you go Titan and double strike it, it's not enough.
Yeah, you need to also have Dryad.
You need to have Dryad, and I think that Amulet has a fighting chance if it wins a die roll, but if you lose a die roll against Hammer as Amulet, I don't think you have very good chances to win the game. Like, Hammer on the play against Amulet, will be almost always too fast. So, as I've said, I think Hammer is an easy A tier deck. Next up, we have Jundito Saga. So another red-black based Lurrus deck. I guess you can argue that Grixis is... Yeah, one more thing about Grixis, because it's obviously a deck that I love and I can't stop talking about it. I think it's kind of unfair to lump Grixis with other Lurrus decks that share these two colors, red and black, because Grixis is much more of a blue-based deck. Like, I would say that Grixis is either a blue-black or blue-red based deck, depends on... Like, it's very strongly into blue instead of like... But because, like, if you are playing Mardu, for example, or Jant, you're basically playing red-black decks with, like, Ren and Tarmogoyf in this case, or Prismatic Ending and Chaos Guys in Mardu's case. So those decks, I think, are fundamentally different in this ways. But enough about that. Jant Saga. I think that Jant Saga is a B tier deck. Why? Because it's bad or unfavored against Yorion. Like, without access to counterspells, you can't really stop Yorion from going over the top of you. And it's really, really bad for you. And if you add to it that Yorion is playing 4 Spreadings in the main deck usually, like, you won't win against Yorion, I think.
There's one chance to win, but it's hard to achieve. The Vrenen 6 plus Urza Saga. And this is quite kind of problematic because you need your tokens to be big enough to survive early Furies. And after the removal on one construct token, then Fury can kill 2 others. Because let's compare, for example, constructs in Jund Saga to constructs in Affinity. Constructs in Affinity would be like 7/7 all the time, or even bigger. Constructs in Jund Saga will very often be 2/2 into 3/3, maybe 4/4 if you are trying to not crack bubble, for example, to make it bigger. And maybe you have Ragavan with
like, if you have 2 constructs and you find an artifact, it's already 3/3. So all you need is like 1 bubble or 1 Ragavan or one of those artifacts you draw naturally that you have in your deck. So
yeah, but you need to still have it. And all value piles know that they need to do something with Urza Saga, so there are a lot of spreading seas, a lot of Alpine Wounds. Teferi Time Raveler can bounce it, and so on and so on. So it's really hard. Like, the meta, like, Urza Saga is obviously a really powerful card, but the meta game adapted to it, and it's not like, you can't fully rely only on Urza Saga. And there's one big problem with Urza Saga in Jund deck. The mana base is not doing things.
that's
Unless
true.
you have Ragavan to make it more smooth, it's really hard to play fast Saga and play your spells to the curve.
Yeah, because
Or if your turn 3 dream is to create a 2/2 construct, sure, go for it. But overall, you should count Urza Saga as a really late game threat and not try to do anything else.
yep, as long as you are going turn 1 Ragavan into turn 2 Saga, cast Tarmogoyf off of Saga, because Tarmogoyf is basically the only spell you can cast off of colorless mana, and like Kolaghan's Command. But if you go Ragavan into Saga Tarmogoyf to make tokens, then sure, be my guest. But as we've touched upon before briefly, Saga has its inherent problems and its mana base mostly. It's also a pretty slow clock against, for example, something like Tron, and you don't have counter spells, so like all your hate cards are basically getting swept by Blast Zone. You can't play Blood Moon because you have Lurrus and because you have Sagas of your own. So yeah, I also think that Saga is not a very well-positioned deck right now, even though it's inherently a strong deck, even if it has its problems.
Yeah, like, I want to say it once again, playing good cards make variance less the threat.
Yes,
So,
because you can mulligan to 6 and 5 easily and win on the back of those broken cards. Okay.
So it's relatively safe to play this type of deck. If, for example, if you have unknown meta, if you are good at June Saga, it's a safe choice. Nearly always.
Okay.
It will be the best choice, maybe not, but always kind of okay.
Moving on, we have another ones of Sodek. Maybe not pet decks, but a deck that he really likes to play, which is Living End.
The deck I mastered, and I have to say that playing Living End for me isn't as fun as playing Dredge or Belcher, mostly because you are doing one thing. Like it's not, it does not feel like a puzzle to me. It's more like asking, do you have it, or do I have my responses to your responses, and that's it. A game very often ends on turn 3, and there are a lot of do nothing games. For example, opponent had chase on 0. Okay, I didn't have fun. GG. End of story. And overall, I think that Living End is a really powerful deck. The combination of cantrips, the combination of one card combo with cascade effects, plus the 8 cards that interact with the opponent, so Grief and Force of Negation, is something that makes Living End nearly always a solid choice. I can't think about the meta when I would strongly avoid Living End. Maybe with a lot of Teferi and Chalices, that would not be the thing, and maybe with a lot of burn around. Also, Tron is not the best matchup too, but it's still winnable.
I think that Living End will mostly be a bad choice in a very small tournaments. Like if you are playing some sort of invitational or Mox finals tournament, when the metagame is not a couple hundred people, but like 20 people, and you know that a bunch of them usually plays blue-white, for example. You don't want to play Living End into 40% blue-white metagame, especially when people know that you are qualified and that you usually play Living End. So they will metagame for you. But other than that, I do think that Living End is second only to Hammer in terms of raw power in the metagame in Modern.
True.
I think that Living End is insanely powerful. Like the core that Sodek told about. It's a stable turn 3 combo with 8 free interaction spells. It can go off in instant speed. It invalidates a bunch of other decks by function of how Living End works. So
Wrath of God as an effect, generally speaking, like people mostly think about Living End as a deck that cheats creatures into play. But in my opinion, the Wrath of God effect is as important. It's not more important to the deck, because you slow down faster decks. You create this tempo advantage when opponent actually needs to have responses to kill your creatures, and if you are killing your creatures, then you can wave them again. And
like
still,
it's basically it's not only Wrath of God against, for example, Hammer. It is Wrath of God and I'm killing you next turn.
Yes,
and that's like bonkers. So,
or for example, I'm killing you next turn, and I'm also playing yet another discard spell to make sure that you won't kill me with your combo.
Or given that you are not playing with a bugged version of it, Architects of Will also provides some insulation against your opponent top deck. If you go for if you have Shardless Agent instead of Violent Outburst and you need to fade one draw step from your opponent, Architects of Will are very good at doing so. So I think it's no surprises for anyone that I put Living End in A tier. I think it's a really good deck, but Sodek put Living End in the B tier. So tell us why.
Mostly because playing Living End versus Teferi decks is not where I want to be. And with so many Yorion decks around, we have 4C Yorion with 4C Blink deck. We have new version of Rhinos with Teferi, and suddenly Rhinos were really good matchup because they had only Force of Negation to stop you. Now they have also Teferi. We have also Blue-White. There's a burn around all the time, and so on and so on. So, in my opinion, and also there's one big problem for Living and Yawgmoth. Yawgmoth has a really like Yawgmoth's threat are really good against what Living End is trying to do because Yawgmoth can sacrifice the whole board in response to Living End. If you ever go for the cascade, they can just wait. If you cast Living End, if you cast Living End, they sacrifice the board and they will lose nothing. So your Wrath of God effect won't work.
It's the same.
And they also
It's the same dynamic as it used to be with Ravager, right? In Affinity. That
kinda, but they also play endurances and they have tutors for
But
endurances.
one big difference is that the Yawgmoth can sacrifice itself, whereas Ravager could. So you're at least killing Yawgmoth with Living End. It's not a big consolation prize, but it is some.
Yeah, but when they are drawing cards, at least they are losing life. So if you have some flyers, you sometimes can kill them, especially with August. But overall, when I'm playing Living End, I don't want to play against Yawgmoth. And of course, there are still high cards. Like we already talked about Chalice, about Teferi. Endurance is still high. And it's really hard to beat Endurance because Force of Negation, usually, like we can usually think that Force of Negation will stop most of the hate. We can just counter anything we play, but you can't force Endurance, even if it's often not played like a creature, but more like a Ravnus trap effect. It's still a creature, so it's going to be a problem. You can still have subtlety, you can still get it early, and so on and so on, but this can be problematic. That's why I'm not as high on Living End as I usually are, but it's still, in my opinion, like I'm half like if there was a tier between A and B, Living End would be there. And in my opinion, in like 2 weeks from now, Living End can easily go to A.
Okay. Moving on, we have Mill. I think we've already touched on Mill when we were talking about bad decks and the positioning of things in general. And for me, Mill is not very well positioned right now. There's a bunch of burns. Burn is really good against Mill. I think Hammer matchup is close, I think.
I think it's good, actually. Because Tasha's Hideous Laughter often one-shots them.
Yeah, but I do think that I haven't played either Mill or Hammer, but I've watched plenty of games, and I do think it's kind of a matchup in which you'd rather choose to be on the play than choose which deck you are playing. Like, I think that Hammer on the play can be... Like, it's hard for Mill to beat the turn 3 of Hammer.
Yeah, you have only Surgical as a real good line to stop it. Versus, like, Mill is an archetype that can be built to beat current problems. For example, if you are expecting slower metagame with Endurances, you play blue-black with Drawing the Lock and counter spells and so on. If you want to try to Goldfish, even if your deck isn't the fastest Goldfish, but you want to increase consistency, you can go for blue-white or even Esper and try to go that route. Overall, I feel that if you want to play Mill, the first thing you should do is to check how many Emrakuls or Kozileks are in the sideboards. And this one, like the fact that your whole strategy can be countered by the opponent just having one card in the sideboard is so problematic that it will be very hard for me to say that Mill will ever be in A tier.
Yeah,
Sometimes people totally forget about it, but the results telling that only very experienced players like Tibalt of the red
Sub
probably is like he's playing Mill blue black version all the time, and I see them going like 1-2 quite often, but from time to time it's very moments and they can
they made finals recently, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, so for me, as I've already said, I'm not super high on Mill right now. It's a C tier deck, in my opinion. I think Sodek shares my sentiment.
Me too, yes. At least like I can see Mill being B, like in the near future, because the lower Mill gets, the fewer Emrakuls will see. So you can side in real cards instead of Soulgate Lanterns to beat it. But overall, I don't like its position. Like, there's only one thing that's really good right now: the rise of combo decks. Like, for example, Mill versus Belcher. You are a Mill plus Surgical Plan is really good versus Belcher. Or if ever you are playing versus, for example, your Rhinos. Rhinos have endurance, but they have like they're also very strongly on the Cascade Plan. So if you Surgical Rhinos, that's also what's really good. So let's just wait and see if the metagame can be a bit better for me.
Okay, next up we have red black, and saying that, let's go on a little rant about red black. I do think that red black is solidly the worst Lurrus deck, or the worst Lurrus deck that shares those colors, because you are not offering basically anything over what Grixis or Jant or Mardu, I guess, can. Because red black truly is very bad against Sanctifier Unvec. You don't have reliable answers to it. Jant has Tarmogoyf that can stonewall or brickwall your Sanctifier at least. Grixis has a multitude of answers, from counter spells to stuff like dress down, explosives. You can even trade in combat with Snapcaster from time to time, or at least make them unable to attack through your Snapcasters while you are drawing towards a real answer. Mardu can play Prismatic Ending, and Jan can cry in a corner. Basically, you can play explosives, of course, but you can't really play like 4 explosives. So at best you'll have 2 ways or so to deal with resolved Sanctifier on Vec. So I don't like it. Also, usually when you're playing the 2-color version of this type of archetype, you are getting really rewarded on mana base, because your mana base is much better. And while it's much better than Jan's mana base because Jan is playing Saga, if Jan chose not to play Saga, the difference in the mana base would be pretty small, I think. And also, Grixis mana base, in my opinion, is pretty great as well. And the card that usually plays a big role in those 2-color versions of red-black X decks is Blood Moon, and you can't play Blood Moon with Lurrus. So I think that's a big loss for the deck. And kinda by principle, I am putting red-black in the C tier because, first of all, as I've already tried to convey, and I think it was pretty clear, I don't think that red-black is a good deck when you can play Grixis or Jant or Mardu instead. And Grixis or red-black shares the same problems of Saga. It can't go over the top of Yorion and stuff like Tron, and you can't really fight against it that reliably because you don't have counter.
What's really important also is you don't have any real responses to Fury. Your creatures are small. Doughty Void Walker is X2. Ragavan is X1. Darcy can be 1/1 or 3/3. So they need always 2 for 2 you.
Yeah.
By not paying mana, they can even go 3 for 2 if you are not careful. And you don't have any form of counter spells. You don't have Tarmogoyf. You don't have Real Saga to kind of compensate that.
This is
they can
exactly what Sodek said. This is by far the worst red-black X Lurrus deck against Fury. By far.
Okay, can we just not talk about this and not lose time, please?
So I guess
it's just a worse version of everything we have.
Okay, so having Sodek said that, you can, I guess, pretty easily predict where Sodek will put it. It's C tier as well. We are not fans of red-black Lurrus on this, I guess, Patreon or this channel in general. Next up, we have a kind of a double feature because we have Reanimator, and Reanimator comes in 2 different versions. There is a counterspell Reanimator deck, or like Esper Reanimator, that's been popular for the last a couple of months at this point, I think. And then we have the Blink, let's say, version of Reanimator that Spiring Spike used to win the challenge last weekend, I believe. By the way, we are recording this on Saturday, the 30th of October, even though it will be live almost a week later because I am moving to my new apartment this week, so we needed to record it earlier while my setup is still intact, and I don't know how much time it will take for me to set up everything properly in my new place. So that's why we are saying that it happened last week because, well, for us, it happened last weekend. So the differences between those decks are fairly significant. It's significant even though the exact number of cards that are different from both of them is not that high, because the more traditional, let's say, version of Reanimator, basically, it plays Counterspell, it plays Consider and Thoughtseize in the main deck, and the Blink version plays Ephemerate with Grief and Solitude, and that's the difference, basically. Because you are sharing Teferis, you are sharing Faithful Mending, obviously whole Reanimator package, Moldrifter, all of those cards are similar in both decks. So, Sodek, which one do you like best?
I'm a Grief Ephemerate fan, and I'm not a fan of Counterspell in this deck. Why? In my opinion, Archon and the Reanimator play with Counterspell is totally not where I want to be because of how the deck plays out. The deck kind of wants to tap out. For example, you have Unmarked Grave, you have the Ferry, you have other things you want to do, and there is very often a situation when you want to deploy or prepare your threats in form of Archon, and you kind of can't do this because you need to keep mana for Counterspell, and it was kind of bad. On the other side, Grief Ephemerate version is, in my opinion, much better in terms of using your natural resources and working with what the deck is trying to achieve. Grief can use cards like Unmarked Grave or any other unused like extra Perseid you have in hand, extra Archons, just to make sure the cost is clear. It's doing for 0 mana, which is, zero. Doing something for 0 is much better than doing something for 1 or 2 compared to Thoughtseize or Counterspell. Plus, this Grief can be reanimated with Persist. This Grief can be hardcasted. This Grief can be ephemerate. The start with turn 1 Grief Ephemerate is still I don't want to say one of the best stats in the format, but there aren't many things that are punishing you for doing that. So you have a really early advantage in doing that. So I kind of like it. And Ephemerate does wonders, in my opinion, in this deck, because you still can take it with Solitude, so your creature matchups are much better compared to the version with Counterspell. Plus, very often when you reanimate Archon, the opponent's plan is to just kill the Archon and move on, like accept that you are creating value and try to still grind you. And when you go Persist on Archon, you force them to sack a creature, you draw a card, you gain life, you lose life, and so on and so on. They are trying to kill you when you go Ephemerate on your Archon, and the game plan is completely broken.
Yeah, the game is over at this point.
Yeah, and just because how Ephemerate works well with other parts of the deck, and how Grief is just a cheaper way to protect the combo, I'm much more like this version. It still has some problems. For example, Counterspell by its own is just a better card without any setup. For example, you don't need to try to use counterspell with other cards to make it work. Counterspell is just good by its own. What overall, in my opinion, is a clear. Like ephemerate version is a clear favorite to me.
Okay, so what are your grades for both of those?
B for ephemerate and C for counterspell version. If you really want to play Reanimator, I strongly recommend going Grief, and I strongly recommend going ephemerate. And I would not ever touch counterspell because mana is awful.
Okay.
And the gameplay is awful.
So as it's easy, Sodek has been saying all that things, but basically it's because B stands for blink and C stands for counterspell. That's how he made his choice. For me, it's much closer. I think that both of them are in the B tier, and I am much higher on the counterspell version than Sodek is. First of all, I don't think that mana is awful. I think that mana is perfectly fine. And you won't convince me that a 3-color 20-something lands mana base in Modern without any colorless sources is awful. It's not possible. The amount of different lands you can play in Modern makes it impossible to not being able to build a decent 3-color mana base. Just because how fetch lands with shock lands and fast lands and everything works. Second of all, I do think that Blink version of Reanimator is a more focused one. It's like not in terms of your gameplay, but in terms of what you are targeting. I think if you have a specific metagame in mind and Grief Ephemerate plus Solitude Ephemerate stacks up well against it, I think this is definitely a big plus for this version. On the other hand, I think that the counterspell version is much more versatile. I think that the Thoughtseize counterspell bind that you put your opponent in is very powerful as well. And for example, if you are playing against decks like, I don't know, if Living End is good, I'd much rather play counterspell and Thoughtseize in my deck than Solitude, for example. So I do think that those two versions are still very close to each other. I do think that people will opt for the ephemerate version more now because it's an aspiring spike effect of winning the tournament. And let's be honest.
Okay, do you know how many modern challenges aspiring spike top-rated in this year?
I don't know.
Guess. Make a guess.
I know that Canister has the most, and then it's you and Laplacian in some order.
Yeah, Canister has 9. Me and Laplacian has 8 right now. I think I will have 9th today.
Okay. I don't know. Aspiring Spike is on like 5, I would say. 6?
3.
It's less than I have.
Like every time Spike has a top 8, it's like a huge
celebration. Yeah,
celebration, and like everyone knows about it, and it's like he's doing it with a really cool deck and something that's not on the radar, and so on.
Yeah,
so on.
I think what makes Spike special is that Spike is a believer. He believes in his deck so much, and he's also great at Magic, obviously. But he's trying to find stuff, like good stuff about things, so hard, and he's so persistent in that he's succeeding with decks that are not as good as Spike makes them up to be because of how well he plays and how hard he believes in them. So I do think that Spike effect is definitely something to be wary of. Moving forward, we have another double feature, which is Rhinos. We have the regular, boring, old 60-card version of Rhinos and Rhinos or Your Rhinos or however you want to call them. So the new exciting 80-card 4-color version of Rhinos. So, what do you think of those decks?
Okay. In Polish, you have a cool meaning, like in the first encyclopedia when they were talking about the horse. The horse is exactly what you see, something like this. And I can exactly say the same about Rhinos. Rhinos are just Rhinos, and
yeah, I think what's like the more direct translation is that because the original is jaki koń jest, każdy widzi, which is not something that you can understand because you're not speaking Polish, but it basically says everyone can see plainly how horse looks like or how horse is.
And like I feel that when I need to talk about Rhinos, it's just the best example of saying what Rhinos is just you cast Rhinos. End of story. You play the best cards you can to slow down the opponent and interact, and you play Rhinos. That's it. And for the long time, Timur Rhinos version was the one that was played exclusively, because like there was at the beginning of the format, people were trying for color with Ardent Plea and Teferi, but it wouldn't succeed. The mana base was more clunky, and so on and so on. So I went to Timur, and the sideboard was like 4/4, 4/3. It was 4 endurance, 4 force of vigor, 3 blood moons, 4 mystical dispute.
Yeah, it was basically not always these proportions, but basically most of Rhino's sideboard were those 4 cards, and one of them, depending on a weekend, was a 3-off instead of 4-off. Sometimes they've had 4 blood moons, sometimes they've had only 3 disputes. It was basically changing. It was usually changing between blood moon and dispute.
Yeah, and I have to say that Doomwake did a lot of work to make this archetype better, because they started with cutting, like at first they were playing subtleties and other like strange stuff, and Bone Crusher Giant, then there was a moment with Seasoned Pyro, and suddenly, maybe for jokes, maybe for
it was for the memes. It was 100% for the memes.
For the memes, they started to play Yorion Rhinos with the package of Solitude, Fury, and Omnat. And so that's
with Teferi
they added good cards and the companion, and suddenly the deck became maybe not better, but it showed the real power. Because I feel that both decks have pros and cons, and you can find reasons that you should play one or another. But after all, both versions of the deck are doing one thing very consistently. They are casting Rhinos. And I like the Yorion version has 12 cascade spells, so the amount of Rhino cards is actually insane. You are not that likely to draw Crashing Footfalls, which is also cool. You are much better at playing the game without your Rhino shell, because, for example, opponent can play Chalice of the Void or Teferi or whatever. And you can just cast your Omnat, play Fetchant, make mana, cast Fury, cast Solitude, and go that way. Okay, so based on what I said, it looks like Yorion Rhinos are much better than regular ones, but there are some weaknesses. For example, 4-color mana base is very soft to Blood Moon. It's so easy to lock Rhinos that if you expect a Blood Moon meta, you should play Blood Moon yourself, because like you can attack many decks from the other angle. Plus any other. Okay, Hendrik, help me. Like I was one more weaknesses of Yorion Rhino, but I forgot about it. Blood Moon and
I think it's mostly Blood Moon. Like for me, this is the tiebreaker. Do you want to play Blood Moon? If so, play the 60-card 3-color version, and I think you can even play Blood Moon main deck. Like those spots that you were talking about, the flex slot of Seasoned Pyromancer or whatever, it can be main deck Blood Moon.
Yeah, especially with
Fury.
4-color Yorion piles are
so. Like another thing that Dom and Nari were discussing last episode is that if you can play a Blood Moon Fury deck, if one of those cards is probably good against any opponent you are facing, and if both of them are good, it's so hard for you to lose. So I definitely can endorse trying to play main deck Blood Moons and Rhinos, especially that it's a very good card for the mirror match. Like if I think that 3-color Rhinos against Yorion Rhinos is Yorion favored, unless 3-color Rhinos are playing main deck Blood Moons. If you're playing 3-color Rhinos with main deck Blood Moons, I think this kind of flips, and then now you are the favorite. So that's pretty great. I also kind of dislike. I guess in Rhinos playing 80 cards is okay because you have more cascades. Mathematically, it's somewhere between playing like the equivalent of playing between 9 and 10 cascades. It's closer to 9, I think. In 60. And you are just adding like good cards and decreasing the chance of drawing footfalls is also very nice. But for me, those decks are pretty close to one another when it comes to power. And I have both of them in A tier, and I think so does Sodek.
Me too.
Great.
Rhinos are really powerful, and like for me, all of these A tier decks, like Hammer, Rhinos, maybe Living End is also like a thing. Like if you want to pick a deck and learn it, and you can pick this deck in basically any metagame, and you can have a really good shot of winning the tournament.
Yes. Okay. Moving forward, we have Tron. By Tron, we mean Green Tron with Arnold Schwarzenegger, Tomasz Karolak, however you want to call this gentleman. And I think we already settled on Tron being a bad deck. And the question is whether it's a well-positioned bad deck and belongs in B tier or poorly positioned deck that belongs in a C tier. In my opinion, it's a pretty easy B tier for me now because Tron seems really good against Yorion piles.
True.
So you agree with me, Sodek? Oh, okay, that's not true. Sodek did not put Tron in the A tier. That's my oversight. Sorry for that. I will try to move it right now.
Okay, at least you tried, yeah.
At least we tried, at least. And
Okay,
now we have to move it up here because our next guest will show right between this Tron and Reanimator, and it's Murktide.
Don't be like, this is our first video together, so
yeah,
this
or our first tier list video at least.
Okay, and Tron is a really good deck. Although I would personally I would try to avoid it for any bigger tournament. I think Tron can be really good for example, Modern Challenge, when you want to how to say. Attack the very specific metagame. For example, you expect a lot of Yorion piles around, you expect a lot of these slower Lurrus decks. Matchup versus Living End isn't the worst. You have tools to fight Rhinos, although I don't think it's that good, but it's not a losing position.
Yep.
Okay, I have card in my
on your face. Yes, I do agree that decks like Tron and to some extent Belcher are much more modo decks than paper decks in terms of.
Actually, I think that there is still time to play Belcher in paper.
Yeah, of course, but
because people like there are still players who want to know what's going on, so you'll have
of course
even more free wins.
Of course, but Belcher will more often be a good modo choice, similar as Tron, because modo metagame shifts way faster.
Yes.
And those exploit decks are way more often can way easily become a great choices. Okay, moving on.
Yeah. Okay.
We have a once King of Modern, and how mighty hath fallen, as we can say, because Murktide is not that great right now, in both of our opinions. As we've already spoiled almost 2 hours ago, we both have Murktide in B tier. Why? Because I do think that getting paired against pile of removal decks like Yorion, 4-color Yorion, or against like Rhinos with Yorion is not a great thing for Murktide. You can still beat those decks. Maybe you want to experiment with main deck Blood Moons in Murktide. Maybe it's something that makes the deck better, so you can attack them from this angle. But overall, I don't think it's a great time to play Murktide, and it very solidly falls into it. It's an archetypical good deck that's poorly positioned to me. Like it's
Like remember when Murktide was really good, when no one really had real responses. Like people were so focused on Ragavan that they were not looking that Murktide can be killed with the most popular removal in the format. For example, Unholy Hit versus Murktide being 8/8, not the best position in the world. Or like there were not a Solitude deck. Like right now, like this blue-white control, and after that a 4-color yellow piles. These are really first decks that are good and they are using Solitude. Very well are black-white mid-range piles with Solitudes, but they were not stable enough to
those are
compete in
wise
the game.
black mid-range decks. They can't ever be good, basically.
That's true, kind of.
So
and like once people found a good removal, like Prismatic Ending, maybe not the best versus Murktide, but it's still good against everything. But once you have Solitude and other, for example, Solitude, Teferi, and Supreme Verdict to stop Murktide, it's not a problem at all. So like Murktide will still be a beast in, for example, a very wide metagame when you are not playing all against Solitude. For example, if you are playing versus combo decks, if you are playing versus random, Burn, Cascade decks, these Reanimator piles, and so on and so on, I feel that Murktide is exactly where you want to be. But it struggles against currently played removal in top decks.
So you would say that Murktide is like Beverly Hills?
No.
Because Beverly Hills, that's where I wanna be, as Wizard once sang. But I think it's kind of important to touch on the fact that Solitude, while great against card Murktide, is not that great against like Ragavan and Darcy, because you are trading 2 cards for 1, and you are trading 0 mana for 1, which is not that great. But once you have enough answers to cover small creatures, so you can save your Solitude for Murktide, that become significantly easier to deal with this deck. Moving forward, and speaking of Solitude decks, we have Blue-White. And Blue-White has been doing really well in the last few weeks. And when we were putting this tier list yesterday, Sodek instantly put Blue-White in A tier.
For me, it's easy.
And when I was let me move that. And when I was debating whether to put Blue-White in A or B tier for like good 20 seconds, Sodek said something to the tune of, if you don't put Blue-White in A tier, I don't know what you would put in A tier. And what he said in Polish was, jeżeli nie położysz tego w A, to jebnę. Tak właśnie było. So I do have Blue-White in A tier, even though I do think that it's not the best time to play Blue-White this week, because I think people are getting I think Blue-White is a fairly exploitable fair deck as far as what interaction Blue-White plays, and if you can circumvent that, you are pretty good versus the deck. For example, Sodek showed that with Belcher, and he went 5-0 against Blue-White in his challenge win.
Like
few weeks ago.
It was like beating a blind child.
It's like taking a lunch money from second grader. So
like they didn't have any real, like they had counters playing Archmage's turn, but they didn't have any form of pressure, and you just played a threat after threat. Like they were also being very soft to Blood Moon, so it was easy. Right now it's not that easy because some of them are playing like Stone Silence, or are playing Dobbin's Veto, or are playing like some forms of a better clock. But overall, and I have a problem on MTGO because once blue-white control players are like see my nick, they instantly are fetching for basics, which makes Blood Moon a bit worse. But you won't have this type of problems if you're playing Belcher.
Well, let's be
Overall, I
honest.
think that
If you're playing against a half competent blue-white player, if they see a double-faced land on turn 1, they will instantly fetch for basics. So
yes,
it's less of a nickname and more of a your first land betrays your whole plan or reveals your whole plan. And I also do think that that blue-white is a B-tier deck if you just take a list that's 2 weeks old and change nothing, and it's an A-tier deck if you innovate and you have those cards like Stone Silence against Belcher, if you have Force of Negation. I think you should have at least 2 forces in the blue-white 75. I do strongly believe that there is a version of blue-white that has 4 forces and 4 solitudes in the 75, and you are just switching between one of those 3 spells in every matchup. Okay, so we are nearing 2 hours at this point, and we have one last deck to talk about, and it's Yawgmoth. Sodek, you are a huge fan of Yawgmoth. Tell us, what do you think about this deck?
I think it's really good. Why? There are several reasons. First, it's a creature combo deck that it's not soft to Fury Solitude. Maybe, okay, it kinda is, but you still can do stuff even if they have it. Because once you land Yawgmoth and they are trying to, like, if they have Fury, you have your whole turn to do the thing. So you can draw like 6 cards, or set up the combo with Undying Creatures, and we are good to go. If they have Solitude, you can just pass. They try to Solitude, you draw a bunch of cards, they lost 2 cards to deal with your Yawgmoth, and after the next turn you just cast another one. Having Undying Creatures is really good versus current removal. For example, if you are playing Jan Wolf into Strangler Rootgeist, and opponent has Fury, will they Fury you? That's a good question. Obviously, there's something like cards like Prismatic Ending and so on, so this can be problematic. But the current Yawgmoth lists are playing better cards, because 2 months ago they were very high on, for example, Geralt's Messenger, which made the mana terrible, and so on and so on. And right now we are playing more cards like Grixis to make this mid-range plan more potent, so you can just make more insects, and once you land the Yawgmoth, you trade these insects into real cards. You can use this insect as a removal spell with Grixis, and so on. It's a really good deck. It's also a great endurance deck because you have Heart of Calling to tutor for it. Your endurance can be sacrificed to Yawgmoth in response to Evoke trigger. It can also be used as a Lotus Petal with Horde of Calling, because when you cast it in response to Endurance Evoke, you can still tap it for Horde of Calling mana. So this is another good example why it's really good. The deck can present 10 free kills, which is, in my opinion, extremely important if you want to be proactive. Just have some percent of the games that will end up 10 free. And you can still kind of grind. It's not the best grind ever. It's not like you'll win only because you have Undying and things, but you can easily beat 1 or 2 removal spells. You can't beat a wave of them, or you can, for example, beat 1 counter spell, but not a lot of them, because your hands often have, for example, 2 Undying Creatures, Mana Dorks, and 1 Yawgmoth effect, and that's it. And if they stop your Yawgmoth, this can be problematic. Still, you can top deck another one, but with yet another counter, this can be rough. Overall, I think it's a really good time to play Yawgmoth, and the deck's results are showing that it's not like, at first it was showed as a fun deck that was always worse than Heliod and so on and so on. But right now, in my opinion, is the best creature combo deck in the format, and has all tools to stay and compete. And like maybe it can be too brave to say, but if you want to find a deck that you want to master, and you don't like Solitudes or playing blue, I think Yawgmoth is a good pickup.
Are you saying what I think you're saying? Are you saying that Yawgmoth is an A-tier deck?
Yes. OMG.
Impossible.
At least for now. Like
Okay.
in a month from now, it can change drastically.
Moving on, my take on Yawgmoth. My favorite thing about Yawgmoth is that, do you know the meme when there is a guy sitting in I think in the car, and he said that I fear no man, but this scares me. And the guy is Ragavan, and the thing that scares him is Yawgmoth, and I really like it because it's like if you play Ragavan and your opponent plays Yawgmoth, it's like what will you ever do? Your Ragavan will never connect.
Attack, trade. Okay.
Your Ragavan will never connect. So that's nice. I do think that going more heavily on Grist and lighter on Messenger is good. I do think that you need 2 Messengers at most. I've played 1 league with Yawgmoth. I've had 2 Messengers, 3 Grist. I 4-1 the league, and I felt pretty good about the deck. Also, on my first time activating Grist, I milled another copy, so I got 2 insects on my first try, which was pretty nice. But I do think that every time I'm playing the deck against the deck with Grixis, it just looks so bad. If you are playing a pile of removal deck, Yawgmoth just looks so bad, especially if you have a creature that can stop their small things. Like, for example, okay, Grist can make 2 insects, but you will finally kill Grist with, like, Unholy Hit. Or you won't, and you will lose. But if you manage to stop this, and they just have a ton of 1/1s, you will play your Omnath, your Lurrus, something. You will stop their attacks, you will kill things that matter, which are Grist and Yawgmoth, and you will win usually. So I don't think that Yawgmoth is that great of a deck, but I do think it's pretty well positioned if your opponents are trying to play creatures like Hammer. So I do think that Yawgmoth is a deck that I think it's like middling on both strength and positioning. So if we have the plane that was there before, with like poorly positioned, well positioned, good and bad, I think Yawgmoth is in the middle of both of these axes right now. So it's kind of a unique position in the moment, in my opinion. So I do think it's solidly in the B tier, but in a...
I think its position is much better than expected because of how Unholy Hit is not played. Like, red decks are kind of push out, outside you playing Grixis, but like
sure, but still... do you think that the Yawgmoth is favored against Yorion decks? I don't think so.
I think it's fine.
I think it's not great.
Like, obviously, they have like Solitude Ephemerate into more stuff. It can be problematic, but I can see the situations when they can just catch you off guard and draw a lot of cards before you can do anything.
Yeah, I guess so. But yeah, I guess that is it, I think. Those are our picks. It's 22 decks, if I can count correctly, and I can. I guess technically 20 archetypes, 2 of which have 2 decks inside of them, so Rhinos and Reanimator. So that is it. That is our tier list for November, or the start of November 2021. No A-tier deck, no S-tier decks, and then a fairly balanced set of decks in each tier from A to C. We won't list them once again because it takes a bunch of time. It's a lot of decks, and there are 2 tier lists, and we don't want to just do that. You can see it on a screen. That's the advantage of having video as your media instead of just audio. Anything else you want to add, Sodek? We are on 1 hour 59 minutes right now. So
yeah, like before, like I want to add another chapter before you ask, Ed. Before you ask why there aren't any tribal decks here. Tribal decks are just very poorly positioned because, like we all the time said, Fury
we've
and
talked about
Solitude are
that
really
last
good.
week, right?
Yeah.
In the free spells video.
So before you ask why they aren't here, now you know. Overall, I feel outside that, I would like to see a creature fair deck in the format. The metagame looks fresh, looks fun to play. Finding there's a combo deck around, so
Okay. Also, there is one more tier that we haven't touched upon before, which is a D tier, which also stands for this is where your pet deck is, spelling DIS for this. So if you wonder where a deck that we haven't mentioned is on this tier list, it's not there. Like, for example, oh, but what about Calibrated Blast Combo or Merfolk or any other deck that I love so much? It's not on the list because we don't think that it belongs on the list. It might be harsh,
sadly.
and at some point, well, some of those decks might be there, but okay, let's.
I would love to say that I was wrong, because I really like these surprises when something is considered as being shit, but it turns out to be really good.
Yes, that's very exciting. Always.
Yeah, and I really want to see next month that I was really wrong about something. I know that there are some Calibrated Blast fans there, and I was playing the deck. I felt it's really bad. It has a very high fail rate. But I heard about like players having 75% in leagues, so you know
that is not possible in my opinion.
I don't want to.
Unless your sample size is like 4 leagues of 20 matches total and you won 15 of them. Okay, that can happen, but I can't.
Yeah, like I don't want to say that it's really good. I want to be surprised next month.
We want to be surprised, and if you want to surprise us, you can try to play some other decks than those listed above or in front of you, and do your best to make us amazed for our next tier list. So, as always, thanks for watching our video. We are truly grateful for your support. If you want to get this content fresh out of the oven, there's a Patreon link below to Modern Solutions. Support us there and you will get our videos the second they are posted, instead of waiting a full month if you are just waiting for this to become public on YouTube. Similarly, there are links to our Twitter accounts, to our Twitch accounts. Everything is down there in the description. Anything you want to add, Sodek, because I see you raising your hand?
Yeah, you can also become our patrons if you just like us, not because you want fresh things.
If you want us to be able to afford stuff like bread, Coke Zero, vodka, pretty magic cards, rent, and everything in between, you can give us money, and we'll be grateful. And I guess we'll see you next week with a new video. Take care, and bye-bye.
See ya.